Hi, everybody. This is Pastor Thomas William Gardner, and I know that a lot of people can't make it to church, and for whatever reasons, I don't know. So maybe a lot of people are shut in, or have car problems, can't find the right church, whatever it is. Maybe they've been meaning to go to church, but every year they've been meaning to go to church, and they haven't made it to church. But I thought about these short stories that are so beautiful, and I thought maybe if I could share, some short stories with you, that it would be a help that you'd hear God's word. And so I have a story here about love and forgiveness and promise, and it's got reconciliation in it and mercy, and all wrapped up in this one story. It starts out about two brothers, and the two brothers, they're Ishmael and Isaac. And Ishmael is born about 11 years before Isaac, but he's not recognized by God as the firstborn son. But yet he was the firstborn son, but he was by an illegitimate way. He was by the handmaiden Hagar. And they're very concerned about him, and he was a very exceptional child, and he was very athletic. And the little brother looked up to him so much. But he was supposed to have Hagar leave and take the child with her, and this is what his wife wanted him to do. So he did, and an angel came to Hagar and said, "Don't worry about anything." He says, "Your son's going to be great. He's going to rise up and be a great nation." And so he went north, and the problem was he got away from the Jewish ways, and he got into the ways of many gods and the Jewish God, and it was all kind of mixed up, and that's the way he went. Well, and then Isaac, the legitimate son, who was born in the old age, and the old age of his wife, Sarah, he was wonderful, and he was a good child, and there's many stories about him. And most of the stories of where I'm at start in chapter 25 of Genesis. And the whole thing was the firstborn rights were going to be given to the firstborn child. And in the Old Testament, on the other side of the world especially, and some in the United States, the firstborn child is the one who receives 2/3 to 3/4 of everything. Then he divvies out who needs to get this and get that. He also has a lot of authority in saying what the other children are supposed to do with their lives. He's now the matriarch, and he's in charge after the father leaves. It's a very big deal, and it's followed very close over on the other side of the world. And I'm not saying there's anything right with it or wrong with it or anything else. I'm just saying this is the way it is. And to some people, it means so much. I'm sure that you've been at funerals. And in the funerals, there were, everybody seemed to be treated equal. But in some families, the oldest got more than everybody else and was in charge of divvying everything out. And you probably wondered where that tradition came from. Well, that's where it came from. But years later, when Father Abraham died, and he went to be with the Lord, the two boys got together and they reconciled the thing. And I think it was because they loved each other. There wasn't hard feelings or anything, even though Ishmael was sent out of the family. And Ishmael evidently realized that his little brother had nothing to do with it, didn't have anything to do with it. And the little brother at the time when they left looked up to him. And I'm sure they loved each other. So this was a story of reconciliation, how the two brothers handled it, and they handled it very well. But Isaac then had a child, and when he had the child, he had twins. And when he had the twins, he had Jacob, and he had Esau. And Esau was born first, and Jacob was holding on to the bottom of his heel as they came out. And the Bible says that when Isaac looked at it, he said, "This is like two great nations that are trying to compete against each other." And as they grew older, they were so different, even though they were twins. Esau was a hunter, And he loved to be outdoors, and everything was outdoors, and he would grow up to be a great warrior. But his brother Jacob he was a very smart guy, and he wanted to stay home, and he was always trying to figure out a better way to do things, and he was planning for his future on how it was going to be when he got older, and he was thinking about how he would be a herdsman, and how when he got older he was going to have things, more servants and more land and more cattle and wives, and he really wanted it, and that was part of the problem. And he deceived his brother, and out of the firstborn rights. Of course, his brother kind of thought this was a joke of some kind, a bad joke. And then he deceived his father so that he got firstborn rights. So he receives firstborn rights and he leaves. And yet he ends up being a hero in the Bible. And you say, well, how can that be? God's not after perfect. He's not after, none of us are perfect. And you say, but Jacob deceived those two. And we don't even know to what extent. So he leaves with firstborn rights. And his brother Esau is told what to do and how to do it and who to marry and who not to marry. So as soon as his father passes, he does as he pleases. And the comment went out that he was going to kill Jacob. He was going to kill his brother. That's how serious this all was at the time. And they left each other, and Esau Esau went his way, and Jacob was kind of like, when you read between the lines, kind of like snuck out. His mother wanted him to go to a certain place, and he went to a certain place, and he met his wife, and he met his uncle, and he went on, and he had to earn everything, and he started to pray to God about this and pray to God about that, and started to get closer and closer to God, and he started to become a really good person, a really fine person. And God started to talk to him back and forth, and they talked, and they had a really great relationship, and he finally got the wife that he wanted, and he got another wife and other wives, and then he had children, and about 22 and a half years passed. And that still, the two brothers hadn't seen each other in a long time. One had become a great warrior in the north with his uncle, who was great in the north, and the other one had become just what he wanted to be. He had the cattle, he had the sheep, he had the goats, he had the camels, he had the servants, he seemed to have everything. He had wives, he had the love of his life. He seemed to just about have everything. And he was moving up in the desert, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes a rider, one of his scouts. And he says, Jacob. And Jacob says, yes. And he says, your brother is on the other side of the hill, and there's 400 warriors, and he's coming this way. And I can't imagine how Jacob must have felt, because at that point of time, there was no reconciliation, there was no forgiveness, there was no comments to each other, there was no brother, I've wronged you, there was none of that. And Esau, who was now a warrior, who had now been killing a lot, and was in charge of a whole lot of men, he was on the other side, and he was probably on a horse or a camel, but he was in charge of these men, and here he came. So Jacob, he grabs his wives and he says, you stand here and you stand there. You stand there. Servants, you stand over here and get the cattle lined up and get it all like this and everything. And he says, now stay here and I'll go to my brother. So they probably were on the ridge of the hill. And here came his brother Esau up the hill. And Esau stopped. And he looked, and he says to himself, is that my brother? Is that Jacob? He called him the deceiver. So he probably thought to himself, is that the deceiver? And Jacob doesn't have a stitch of self-worth at this moment. Even though he's accomplished all that, he probably thinks he's going to die in the desert, in front of his family, in front of his servants, in front of his animals, in front of God. He's going to die in die in the desert in front of his brother and his brother's soldiers. And Esau freezes, and he looks, and Jacob runs towards him. And then he goes down to his knees, and he bows to him. And he starts to say things like, my brother, I've shamed you. And he goes on about what he's done to him. He goes down to his knees and he bows himself, I'm your servant. And then he gets up. And then he runs. And then he goes down to his knees. And Esau's just standing there with the soldiers. He's just on top of his horse or his camel, we'll say his horse. And he just watches him. And he goes down again. And he says some more things. And he says, I am your servant. You are my master. And he goes on about it. And he gets up. And he runs. And he goes down again. And he says these things to him again. He says more. And again. And again. And again. And again. And he gets down and now he's much closer to his brother. 7 times he bows himself. Esau can't take it. So he gets off his horse and he runs for his brother. He puts his hands up in the air. And then he puts his hands on his brother. And he wraps his arms around his brother. And he holds his younger brother, his younger twin brother. And he holds him really tight. And Esau cries. And he cries. And he cries. And he kisses his brother's neck. And Esau looks at him, and his brother's still babbling on about how terrible he was. And he says to him, I have many, many possessions, brother. I own many, many things. And I've got gifts for you. I've got horses for you, and I've got sheep for you. And he goes on with all these things that he has. And Esau looks at him and he says, brother, the Lord has dealt well with me. I'm doing fine. I don't need your possessions. It's good that I saw you today. It's good. And he says, no, you got to let me try to make this right. And Esau says, no, I don't need anything. There's no point to it. Look at me. I've done well. And he says, brother, please accept, please accept. And he goes on about it. Esau says, okay, whatever your gifts are, then I'll accept your gifts. That's fine. And they raise up a little tabernacle and they say, from here on forth, says, my family will never attack your family. My family will always love your family. We will respect each other. And we will never have another fallout again, brother. And Jacob is beside himself with joy. And he leaves. And he's been forgiven by his brother. And then God says to him, he says, this land over here in Canaan, he says, it's yours. Go and build a well upon it. And he says, I will. He says, everything is good now. Everything is good. Because his brother forgave him. Esau didn't have to forgive him. But I think he saw his little brother and he probably said to himself, we played together every day. We joked together every day. We had competition every day. We ate with each other every day. Mom and Dad told us the same things. And I couldn't stand to see him in the desert bowing down in front of his family, in front of my men, in front of me. That was enough. It was enough. And he forgave him. And what I get from that was not only the reconciliation between the two of them coming together that they'll never hurt each other again, but it was the forgiveness that the brothers had for each other. And it was also realizing that Jacob had come a long way. Instead of being a deceiver, he was now a man of God. See, people can change. So you could see that in the story. And so not only was there forgiveness, but there was mercy. In other words, he didn't have to give him mercy. Over in that part of the world, we know what they do with swords. And he could have done that in front of everybody. And everybody would have said, don't cross Esau. And he probably would have got even a bigger reputation. But that was his brother. He hadn't seen him in a long time. Probably remembered the good things. The good things. But what I loved about it, this story, was the love and the forgiveness, reconciliation. If they can do it, we can do it too. Well, that's just a few thoughts that I had. Stay tuned. I got another sermon coming. May God bless you.